At no other time in history have we had a geopolitical, a fiscal, and a monetary setup like we have now in terms of providing a tailwind for the metals prices. I think one of the biggest factors that will influence things going forward is more people waking up.
Welcome to the Resource Update. My name is Dan, and today I have the great pleasure of having on Ron from Ron's Basement. Welcome, Ron.
Hey, thanks, Dan. It's a big honor to be here with you, and thanks to you, and thanks to everybody who's out there watching our video right now.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on, Ron, because I started zooming in on the space, I would say, in around 2019, 2020. And you were one of the first channels I kind of gravitated to. So it's a real honor to have you on. I was looking back kind of nostalgically the last couple of days, and I uncovered a video you had done on fortitude, which was
Yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah. I was going to apologize. I'm surprised you didn't run the other direction, but it's great to hear that you joined me down here in the basement.
Great. Yeah. And I think that's a good segue for my audience and for anyone who may not be familiar. Can you talk about Ron's Basement and what you're all about?
Yeah, sure thing. I'd had a successful career, I'd owned a couple of businesses. And when I turned 52, I was at a really hard point in my life where I couldn't figure out what I wanted to do. Most people go through that in their early 20s, but I was 52. I was kind of in a position where I could have, I guess, gone out to pasture and sailed off into the sunset, but I really wanted to do something more. I love gold and silver. I always have. And I also am a very creative person. And I was fascinated with YouTube, like you're doing, like you and I are doing right now. You and I talking, connecting with people all over the world. I was 52. I realized that like 30 years earlier, the ability to make videos and to literally have people all over the world be able to connect with you was like not even something that was feasible at that time. As I was going through this kind of hard period of my life where I was feeling a little bit down on myself, it kind of just dawned on me like, I love YouTube. I'm a creative person. I love gold and silver. Why not combine all three of them together? And literally at the time was like a $150 Samsung cell phone and 6 light bulbs that I still use now. I launched a YouTube channel and I made a commitment, very important. I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't quit, that I would do it for a year, that I would make one video a day for a year, and that I would learn something new about making videos for 1 year. And of course, learn about gold and silver, because I knew that about 6 weeks in, it would turn into really hard work. As you know, like people that are watching may not realize this, but what Dan is doing and what I do is why most people quit. So I knew I would want to quit, but I knew that I really wanted it to be successful. So long story short, that's what I did. And 4 years later, I still tend to put out a video every day. So that's how I got here.
That's great. Yeah, no, it feels like, markets wise, it was a bit of a hard slog for a few years, but,
Yeah.
fruits are kind of coming to bear.
Yeah. Yeah.
In terms of precious metals, was there a specific moment or book or something that kind of turned you on to precious metals,
You
gold,
know,
silver?
I have a degree in accounting, and I actually worked for one of the big four accounting firms right out of college. So I always understood finance and markets, and I loved investing and analyzing investments. Prior to doing this, I was in the tech field. And in 1999, most people who are watching probably remember there was the Y2K, and the world was going to blow up, and it was going to be Armageddon. I started reading about gold, kind of came onto my radar screen, and it opened up that whole rabbit hole of learning about the Federal Reserve, learning about fiat currencies. So really right around 1999 is when I first got into precious metals. Now, I have to admit, I'm a very I like to say resourceful, but my wife, she's known to everybody as Upstairs Susie. She talks on walkie-talkie when I'm on live streams. She has other words to describe me, like cheap and overly frugal. But I was always attracted more towards silver because I honestly I love gold and I love gold mining stocks, no doubt about it. but something about silver, the actual metal and holding it, and the fact that to me, because I'm resourceful, I could get a lot more silver for my money. I kind of gravitated a little more towards silver when it comes to the physical metals.
Got it. In terms of mining stocks, then, was that kind of a fast follow? Was that kind of in '99, or did you focus on the metals, for a while first, kind of on the macro level?
A little bit. I didn't really get into the mining stocks until about 5 or 6 years ago. I messed around a tiny bit, but I was kinda in and out and, wasn't, super dedicated to learning about the mining sector and the mining stocks, so that really came about probably about 6 years ago.
Okay, sounds good. And in terms of your first mining stock, what was it, and how did it go?
Yeah. Well, I think my first love in mining stocks, and if you go back on my channel, you can see even probably 6, 7 years ago, one of my very first YouTube videos was about, where is it? Right there, my left finger, First Mining Gold, who now sponsors my channel. That was the first precious metals, and they're a developer, but mining stock, gold mining stock that I really got interested in. And that just opened up this whole sector to me, as I, at the time didn't really know what the difference between an explorer and a developer and a producer was. But yeah, First Mining Gold was a company that really appealed to me even back then because they had all the at the time this was they've evolved over the last 6 years, but at the time they were like I forget the term they used to use for it, but like a metals bank. It was during the dark days of the bear market in gold, and Keith Neumeyer, who founded the company, went around and acquired like 7 or 8 big previous projects where people had spent tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and he was buying them for pennies on the dollar. And like I said earlier, I have a friend who likes to say he likes to buy dollar bills for a nickel, and I felt like I was able to buy dollar bills for a nickel back then. So that kind of started me on the journey of precious metal mining stocks.
That's great. Yeah, I think a close comp maybe would be like Admira Anani's Gold Mining Corp, kind of a similar type of thing, right?
I own that stock also right now, and at one time that was by maybe 4 or 5, gosh, maybe 7 years ago. I'm sorry, I'm bad with time, but that was one of my biggest holdings at one point. It's not any longer, but I still do own it.
Yeah. I held it for quite a few years there as well, and they've done some interesting things. Flipping over to gold for this year, what do you think of the headlines and kind of what are your thoughts on things as they are right now?
I feel very comfortable with the gold and where the gold price is right now. Um, it just, we could talk for hours, but when I look at what's going on in the world geopolitically, when I look at what's going on in the world financially, fiscally, with all the debt and everything else, and then we look at where I think monetary policy is going, money printing, it all kind of feeds together. I feel real good about gold, where we are now, and I think if we choose to measure it in U.S. dollars, whatever, that the price of gold will continue much higher.
So then, do you think into 2027 that will shift materially, or the theme is kind of there to kind of drive it for the foreseeable future?
I think that there's some major forces that are, I love the word confluence, that have kind of come together at once, that will provide a strong tailwind for the gold price and the silver price as well. There's going to be volatility, right? I mean, that's part of, I don't like it. Like, I love volatility on days like today where the gold price and the silver price are deep into the green. But the other, that sword cuts both ways. But the overall trend and the overall macro forces, I think, are in place that, yeah, we could, I could see, where are we today on gold? 4,800 US dollars per ounce. That, by the end of the year, it wouldn't shock me if we had gold at 5,500. I'm hearing a lot of people say 6,000, and that we go into the sevens or who knows where in 2027. I just think that the forces, there's so much momentum and so many forces that are coming together behind these metals right now, that the trend will continue to be upward.
Yeah, it's interesting how it changes the cash flows. I spoke to a company a couple of weeks ago, and they're developing a 75,000 ounce a year producer, which even a few years back wasn't considerable. But when you talk in terms of cash flow, that'll be north of 200 million. So
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, for mining stocks, it's incredible whether you're, so referring to silver or to gold, right? I mean, a mining company who's making $1,000 per ounce profit at $3,000 gold is going to make 3,000, right? My math is correct at $5,000 gold. It's a massive cash. I mean, yeah, and the market has not woken up to what I think still is there's not been kind of that aha moment in the general markets regarding what I think is going to come in the mining sector.
yeah, I would tend to agree, and I think it's even taken a while or longer than I would have expected to kind of get to where we are.
Yeah, yeah. We've done really well. We've done really well, but it's still when you look at the metrics, I'm a numbers guy, and when you look at the metrics, I mean, on any level, it's hard to believe because a lot of these mining stocks have gone up 100, 200, some 4, 500%, right? To think that there's still a value, but they really are from a numbers perspective. It's quite an incredible situation we find ourselves in.
Agreed. Is there a macro driver that you think people are underestimating? Aside from kind of what you've laid out.
That's a great question, and I don't know that I have a great answer for it. I think I'll just go back to what I said earlier. I mean, at no other time in history have we had a geopolitical, a fiscal, and a monetary setup like we have now in terms of providing a tailwind for the metals prices. I think one of the biggest factors that will influence things going forward is more people waking up. I think that I live right here in the heartland of America, St. Louis, Missouri, and I think it's a fair representation for what is the case throughout the entire country. Like, none of my neighbors, and I live in kind of a upper middle class neighborhood. When I go to the neighborhood pool in the summer, at least last summer, we'll see if it changes this year. But nobody wants to talk about about the fiscal situation of the United States, the national debt. So is I think that's one of the biggest underestimated factors for the actual physical metals, but also for the mining stocks, is that when people do wake up, and it's such a small sector, especially the mining stock sector. I like to call it the law of small numbers, right? Like it's a lot easier when we go from whatever it is, 1% of the world's wealth, 2% of the world's investable capital in the metals sector, to go from 2% or 1% to 6 or 8%. That's a massive increase, right? And I don't think that a lot of us realize. I mean, I think we got a taste of it back in January with when silver and gold had those, kind of spectacular runs, what it could feel like when more people come into our sector. But it's so small that just the smallest amount of people coming in makes a massive increase. I think it was that guy Doug Casey says it's like trying to drain Hoover Dam with a drinking straw or garden hose. I think I think the potential's there for it to be super exciting just to get back to a fair value, whether you're talking about gold mining stocks or silver mining stocks.
No, I think that makes sense, and yeah, I think to your point, kind of those confluence of the three pieces kind of coming together is really going to kind of help to drive that. I guess let's go over to your favorite, silver. What do you think of things as they are now, the trends, the headlines?
Yeah, I love silver, and I would say pretty much the same thing about silver that I would say about gold. There's the confluence of those factors, but then of course you've got the big silver deficit. The Silver Institute just yesterday put out their annual silver report predicting the sixth straight year of deficit because silver has that added industrial component, obviously with electronics, energy with solar panels, everything. I mean, silver is just, and I'm a firm believer that silver is still a monetary metal. I like to point out the fact that how can you say it's not a monetary metal when the U.S. Mint, the UK Mint, the Australian Mint, and a host of other mints around the world still create sovereign silver coins. So yeah, I think the outlook for silver, and I think silver. I think the other thing to talk about when it comes to gold mining or silver mining companies is that because the metals have been so neglected over the last several decades, right? Like people doing what you and I are doing still even today is an exception, but 5 years ago, like nobody cared about silver and gold. And there was such little money in the sector that there was very little invested in the pipeline for future mine development for gold, but in particular for silver, right? I mean, nobody was out, very few people, only the visionaries were out exploring for silver when silver was at $20 or $25 per ounce. So the future supply profile for silver and for gold as well, I think, are much more constrained than a lot of people realize.
In terms of the industrial uses for it, do you think that that would put kind of any kind of cap or influence it differently than gold, say?
Yeah, yeah, yes, absolutely. Because I don't know, the number like 50% of it is being consumed at this point. There's different projection, speculation that certain industries will engage in what's called thrifting, meaning finding ways to use less silver, whether it's in solar panels, EV batteries, whatever the case may be. But the overall trend is still that there's growing demand for industrial uses for silver. Silver, I heard one time, there's more patents at the U.S. Patent and Trade Office that include silver than any other metal on the planet. So I think there could be new uses for silver as well. I like to call it, what is it, the energy and electronic metal, right? I mean, it's like critical for energy and electronics. And Dan, for 6 straight years, we're at a deficit. That means like there's this silver, what would you call it? Like a rainy day fund that's above ground, and it doesn't last forever, right? I mean, if we continue, I mean, nobody knows for sure what that is, and you hear people say, "Well, all these grandmas have silverware, and there's all this scrap silver." Well, there's only so much of that as well, right? It's a finite resource. Eventually, eventually, they're either going to have to produce more silver, or we're going to run out of above ground resources. Phil Baker, the ex-CEO of Hecla Mining, was on record 6, 7 weeks ago saying that he didn't think that the silver mining sector would be able to increase production until sometime around 2030 or later. And we know that for the last number of years, the amount of silver coming out of silver mines has been either stagnant or kind of slowly. It's not like going off a cliff, but the amount of silver coming out of silver mines has been trending slightly downward.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because I think there's a lot of silver companies, but there's not so many primary silver mines.
No,
Yeah.
no, that's the other thing. I'm sorry. You cut me off whenever you want to. Right. But yes, I read the other day, I've heard the stat, right? Somewhere between 70 and 80% of silver is mined on accident. I think that's a powerful statement, right? I mean, it really is. It's mined on accident. It's part of, most of it is from copper mining. And, then we got this news last week that China is going to stop exporting sulfuric acid, which is critical to heap leach processing for copper. So that could decrease the amount of silver coming out of the copper mines. And I heard Ross Beatty say this about a year or 2 years ago. He said that the other thing going on with silver as a byproduct of copper is that the new silver mines I think it's because they're deeper. I'm sorry, the new copper mines, because they're deeper, they don't have as much silver that are kind of native with the copper deposits. I absolutely remember hearing him say that. So yeah, there's just not, I mean, there's a handful of actual silver mining and development or exploration stage silver companies.
If we could step over now to some of your mining stock,
Yep.
wins and losses. Is there a stock that kind of comes to your mind as one that kind of really clicked and your thesis kind of played out, one that you'd want to share?
Yeah, I mean, what the first one that would come to mind would be First Mining Gold, right? I mean, that was a stock that I liked, I loved, and it was a long-term process, right? Where I had to keep going back and saying, okay, does my thesis, the more I learned about mining, the more I learned about the mining stocks, is my thesis still intact? Because like all the other junior miners, I mean, there was like a 4-year period where you know, you'd buy it at one price and then, 8 months later, you could buy it at like a 30% discount. And then 8 months later, you could buy it again at a 30% discount. So I think what it taught me was, to learn more about the industry, but also patience and going back and kind of revisiting, the original reasons why I bought the stock. And it's done really well lately, over the last year, it's done spectacularly well. But I still think, in my opinion, that it's a great value where it is. So you're always kind of reevaluating things. And yeah, it's been, I've had a lot of lessons. I think you asked me about a winner. Maybe you'll ask me about loser, because I've had a few of those over the years as well. But, another one, let me mention a couple more on the producer side, Equinox, or they call it Equinox Gold, the company that Ross Beatty started. They just opened their Valentine mine, and what's the other one? Greenstone up in Canada. There was a point where I had like a significant amount of my family's net worth invested in Equinox, and it did just like we talked about. It went down, it went down, it went down, right? And again, it was a situation where when you're looking at who owns the company, who's managing the company, what they're doing, where I just stuck with it, and it turned out well. Fortuna Silver, which is now Fortuna Mining, was another one. I mean, it was like I don't know if I think you've been around this for a while. Like 3 years ago, it seemed like the only thing you got news wise from mining companies or just the overall sector was not really good news, right? So it took real fortitude, and I think the ability to recognize value to stick with things.
Yeah, no, I think to your point, there was quite a few years where it was, good news sell, bad news sell.
Yeah,
uh,
right.
as a general kind of downtrend on the stock, so it's fair. Yeah, no, and it's great you mentioned Equinox. I'm actually going to be having them on next week.
Really?
They have, yeah, they've got a bit of a reset, or sorry, a big reset kind of going on. I think in terms of how people probably historically saw them, and now with the big Canadian assets you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, great, and that's a great example because I made videos about them, and I don't know who you're having on, but Rylan Bailey, I think it is, who's their director or was their investor relations. Like, I would, that's the other thing about these companies that I'll tell people that are watching. Like, you can call them, and the good ones will call you back. And Rylan would call me back, right? And I remember driving up to Wisconsin on vacation when you're talking to her on the phone, and I wasn't bugging her. She was really nice, and I've had her on my show. And I knew from talking to her, and I'm not disclosing any non-public, but like she was heavily invested in the company. The managers at Equinox were heavily invested in the company. At the time, it was Greg Smith, who was the CEO, and he was heavily invested in like you just get a feel. And of course, Ross Beatty was heading up the whole thing at the time, still is, I guess, founder and chairman. But yeah, like you can actually get to know these people and get a feel for like how serious they are and how vested they are in the company.
That's great. Any that didn't go to plan? You don't have to name names, but like any kind of ones where you learned a lesson on kind of what you thought versus what kind of played out.
Yes. That's the one thing I will share, and a lesson that I mean, I guess I was lucky because my big investments have been in First Mining, Equinox, and Fortuna. Those are probably my biggest ones. This sector, especially when you go down the food chain, right, from the producers to the developers to the explorers, becomes more and more risky. Um, yeah, I don't really want to name names, but I think the biggest lesson that I learned, and it's hard, it's different with mining stocks, because when you're in a bear market, you can get presented with better and better entry points or better and better opportunities to average down, but you got to really be careful. I'm 56 now, and maybe when I was 46, I was a little more, maybe too risky with things. But just, you never know what's going to happen with any company, right? With life in general. But I think in particular in the mining sector, I remember, gosh, it was probably 9 months ago, and I forget the name of the company, and I don't want to name their name, but they were maybe a mid-sized company up in Canada, and they had like a catastrophic failure of their, what do you call that? Their leach field or whatever it was. Um, and the stock like went to nothing, right? I mean, like the only thing I would tell people is be responsible, always kind of diversify within the sector. I mean, now I probably own 30 different mining stocks. I know enough about them all that they tick my boxes. But yeah, just be careful, thinking that just because something gets less expensive, that it's a better value, because sometimes that's not the case.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think diversification is a really good thing, and as long as you're able to cover all of the names and kind of keep up with what they're all doing, it's a good risk mitigation for
Yeah,
sure.
I own one called, what's it called? Spanish Mountain Gold, which is
Oh yeah,
up in, I think BC, and it's not a huge position, but it's big enough that I need to pay attention to it. And I was going through my portfolio as I'm like, why did I buy that? And so I started digging in again. It doesn't take me long. One thing I always look at is inside ownership, and I watched a couple of the recent videos with the CEO. I'm like, okay, now I remember why I own this, and I felt warm and fuzzy. You always want to make sure that you feel warm and fuzzy about what you own.
that's true. So we've talked about a few different development companies. Any explorers or early stage exploration type companies you're looking at or you're attracted to?
I follow Brixton Metals.
Okay.
Brixton is based out of Canada. I own the stock. They actually are a sponsor of my channel as well, but I've owned the stock for 8 years, right? And it's gone down. It's not one that's gone up, but I follow them closely because they've got one of the biggest land packages up near I think it's the Golden Triangle, this massive project that has potential for big copper, big gold, big other things. BHP has invested in them. They made a strategic investment. They've got a big project in Montana, Hog Heaven, which besides being a really cool name, Ivanhoe Electric has partnered with them, or what do they call it, a joint venture where Ivanhoe's doing a bunch of drilling there. And
Like an
they've
earn
got,
in type of thing.
yeah, an earn-in deal. They're exploring there in Montana. And then they've got like this other project, Langus, which is more of a silver cobalt project. So they've got like this diverse. What I love about explorers and developers is I think there's still huge value there. I've kind of scaled out of a lot of the big producers and moved more into the developers because I just love this idea, Dan, because I'm an accountant maybe, that I can buy silver in the ground that's valued at like 50 cents or $1 per ounce, right? And I know and that's a big lesson that I had to learn early on. There's a long, not risk-free pathway from there being a, defined resource in the ground to it actually being mined. But still, just this idea that if I'm going to be, I used to joke around about gold because I don't really own any physical gold, very little. I would say I don't stack physical gold, but if I own First Mining Gold, I own X amount of shares that are X amount of money. Like I've got a bunch of gold in the ground in Canada. It's just buried in the ground, but that's where the pirates kept their gold anyway. So
In terms of when you're looking at a new company, do you have kind of a set checklist, or like you mentioned, management alignment and shareholder ownership, which is really important?
I do, and I know there's some people that have, like, I can't pull it out and say, "Yeah, Dan, here it is. I can walk you
Right.
through this." I'm gonna look at what the metal is. I'm gonna look at where it's located because I do think jurisdiction matters. I'll own, stuff in Africa, wherever, but I wanna kind of factor that make sure there's a discount that's being applied for jurisdiction, or maybe not too much of a premium, right? And right now it feels like to me, especially with Canada, that you can get a really good deal on buying exploration and development stage companies, and the United States for that matter, where the metals are in the ground. The other thing that I think is always really important to me is, a lot of people are all tied up on inside ownership. And one of the lessons I learned in the silver mining sector early on, there's very few silver development stage, exploration stage companies. And it seemed like when I started to dig into them, the first couple that I would get into, I'm like, Eric Sprott owns 10% of this company,
Right.
right? And I'd be like, oh man, that's great. The Eric Sprott, if he bought it, I got to buy it. And then I'd go look at another one. Eric Sprott owns 9% of this. And I'm like, and then, go down the list. I'm like, wow, Eric Sprott. And I love Eric Sprott. I think it's great when he's invested in a company that I'm invested in. But then it dawned on me, like, well, he owns like 10% of every silver mining company out there. The reason I give that, and he's a billionaire and he's, got a lot of money. And the reason I say that is when I'm evaluating a company, one thing that is very important to me is not the percentage of the stock that the CEO and the managers own, but how big of an investment it is to them. And I actually wrote up a paper on it a couple years ago and had a name for this concept. You could have a CEO of a mining company who maybe had a lot of great success earlier on. Maybe the guy's worth $500 million, and you've got a $20 million market cap company, and he owns 25% of it. So he owns $5 million worth of it. Well, that's only 1% of his net worth, right? So on the
Right.
surface, you may say, oh, well, Joe's CEO owns 25% of the company. So you think, oh, that's got to be great. He's aligned. And not saying he's not aligned with shareholders, but it's not as important to me as maybe, let's say it's a $1 billion market cap company that the CEO only owns 1% of, which would be what, 10 million? But that's like 80% of his personal net worth, right? To me, that's a much more powerful indicator. And when I talk to the CEOs, I'll ask them, because I figure, I'll ask them, like, how big, how important, how big is your investment in your company relative to your total net worth? And what I found is, if it is a big deal, they're more than happy to share that with me. They'll say, it's like 40% or 30%, or it's very significant. And to me, then I know that they got real skin in the game, that it's not like, oh, I own 10% of the company, but it's 1% of my net worth. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a key thing, and it's funny the Eric Sprott comment you made. Like, I had a parallel experience, until I was on CEO.ca one day, and somebody posted the dozens and dozens of companies that he held.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I love the guy. I think he's great. Obviously, that's not a criticism in any way,
Right.
but I quickly learned, like, well, it's good, but it's not maybe as good as I thought it was in terms of a indicator.
Yeah, no, and I think to your comment on the management ownership, it does have to be meaningful to them because, technically on paper they could have 10% of the company, but if they bought it at a quarter of a penny,
Right. Yeah.
it's yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Nope. Nope. Good point.
We talked a lot about silver and gold. Is there any other metals that kind of pique your interest right now?
Probably copper. But it's not a close third. Although I do own some copper. I own a company called Arizona Metals, which has been a loser for me. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but they've got a big copper project in Arizona, of all places. But I believe in the CEO. I'll tell you a quick story that's outside of the metals sector, but it's in the resource sector. There was a company that I became obsessed with right around the C19 time, right before C19. The natural gas sector, oil and gas got decimated. I guess that would have been late 2020. I mean, decimated, right? And I became obsessed with a company called Antero Resources. Their symbol's AR. Please don't look it up and tell me what the price is, because
Okay.
I started buying it, um, and then I bought it, I think for around $2 per share. And I mean, and I knew everything about this company, and it went down to $1 a share. I bought more. It was one that I had a lot of to me, a lot of money in. And Antero then, subsequent to and this is a good lesson, I think, for gold and silver investors as well. It kept going down, and I thought, oh my God, I'm financially ruined. And then after C19, it started going back up, and I like doubled my money on it. Okay. It went from like probably $1.50. I think I sold it around $3 a share. And then in the coming 2 or 3 years, it went to like $30 a share, $40 a share. Uh, and I forgot why the story there is, don't sell too soon. I'm not giving financial advice, but what I've learned, is because I used to be a real all or nothing person. Like I sold all of my. I remember, on my phone, just as soon as I doubled my money, I'm like, I'm out, right? I'm done. That with these stocks, and if we're gonna have like really are, and I believe we're gonna have like a decade long bull market for the commodity sector in general. Just if you sell everything, you might miss out on some big gains. And a good friend of mine who was a top trader at a top financial services company here in St. Louis, a big name company, he gave me a piece of advice. He said, if you got a big winner like that, sell half and hope you're wrong.
Right.
Hope that if I had sold half of that Antero, and held on to half of it, hoping that it was a bad decision to sell that first half, I would have done spectacular. And I think and that's kind of the approach I take now with the resource stocks. If I get one that might double or triple, I may sell a third of it or a half of it, and then just hold on to the rest and see what happens.
No, I think that's good advice. Like take the risk off the table and then just kind of let it ride. When you're looking, or if someone's new to this space, what would be some advice you would give them on looking at a new company or speaking to a CEO or reaching out? Would you have a top, one or two questions that you would always want to ask?
Yeah, I would say to be very careful, because when I first got into this sector, even though I knew a lot about finance and money and how markets worked and all that, you need to learn kind of the ins and outs of the precious metals sector, the difference between an explorer and a developer and a producer. You need to understand that, like an explorer, it's a big step for them to go from being an explorer to being a developer, and there's risk that it won't happen. Just like there's risk that a company going from being a developer to an advanced stage developer to a producer, that there's also a risk in there as well. I think at first glance, new people, including myself, can come in and just presume like, well, you know, this is going to become a mine and it's going to happen in 3 years or a year or by the end of the year, right? Where they don't realize kind of all the ins and outs of what goes on within the sector, and that they want to get broad exposure. Just buy the ETFs, right? Buy the GDX or the GDXJ or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's kind of a hard lesson that I've learned as well is, you always want things to happen quickly and happen as quickly as they're kind of put out there, but usually it'll take, an extra couple months or 6 months or just
Yeah.
depending. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to be
Um,
more the norm in the precious metal sector. Things always tend to take a little bit longer than sometimes than what you're promised, but especially than what you may be, optimistically hoping for.
yeah, no, patience is a virtue. Um, is there any conventional wisdom that you see out there that you just, you don't necessarily agree with, or you kind of shake your head? Is anything that you see along those lines?
You mean in the general markets, in the uh, I'll answer the question from the perspective of the general markets. I don't think I know, right? Because I understand numbers that the precious metal sector is still undervalued, and that 99% of the people out there have no clue what they're buying when they invest in the general markets, because we've had such a growth in passive investing that we have so many people that have just kind of fallen asleep, at least here in the United States, when it comes to investing, and they think, well, my 401k, I just put money into this general mutual fund, or I buy the SPY ETF, that there's so much passive investing that I think most people don't realize that what they really own or maybe don't own. It maybe frustrates me, but also excites me when I look at the gold and silver mining sector, the developers, the explorers, that there's so much value there. And maybe even, because it's become in the United States even harder for a lot of people to even buy a lot of these junior mining stocks, that like when eventually I know that like that the value will be harvested. But in the interim, it can be a little frustrating just to hear people say, oh, my 401k, it just goes up and up and up. Like all the people that are doing no work, um, right? And just, they are doing no work and have no clue even what they're buying, um, that they've done really well. And look, the gold and silver sector has also done very well over the last year, but that I still don't think that the true value has been realized within the metals sector. And Dan, if we go to a point where we go to a state, I mean, it could be very exciting. I think just getting back to fair value could be very exciting. I think if then more and more people come in, you hear these stories, right, from the 1980s, whatever, where there's a mania for precious metals mining stocks. It could get very interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think I've heard the stats of I think it's a quarter of or a half a percent or less of people's portfolios are in this space, and I think to get even back to mean, I've seen stuff from Rick Rule. I think it was like 2%. So
Yeah.
to get back there would
It
would
it
be a lot.
it's it's real numbers, right? I mean, I pulled up a chart earlier this morning on my live stream comparing the Dow Jones Industrial Average to the silver price. It was like the Dow to silver ratio, which currently I think is at like 660 or something like that when you divide the Dow by the silver price. But if you look at a long-term chart of that going back to like the 1960s, it's been as low as like 25 during the 1980 peak, right? I mean, and it was the guy North Star Bad Charts was who put it out on X. He said that like, that would be like $800 plus silver. We think these things, and imagine, and then when you look at the mining stocks, I mean, when you look at, sorry, I'm going long here, Dan, but when you look
No,
at
no.
like the total market cap of the gold mining sector, and then you can't even see it, the silver mining sector, like on a bar chart compared to like these other sectors, it's like, oh my gosh, and then you look at the historical levels where those have been. It's, I mean, gold is apparently not going anywhere, because the stats behind what the central banks are doing, and silver isn't going anywhere either. So I mean, just to get back to reasonable valuations, I think, whether you're talking about the actual physical metals or the stocks, I think there's a lot of exciting times to come down the road.
Do you have one lesson that took you a while to learn, but once you got there, it really clicked and it really kind of changed the way you invest?
Man, I've got notes stuck up all around me down here in my office. I think probably, and I've read all the books on trading, right? Learning, and I'm not an active trader. Number one, I learned the hard way, right? Every time I try to make a quick buck, I wind up losing a quick buck. I don't know what it is, but I mean, I'm like 90% failure rate if I decide that I'm going to buy some put options on something that are going to expire in a week or something. that long-term investing, and really digging in and really understanding what you own, I think is the real way to build like serious wealth. And the other thing is this idea that is can be hard to internalize, but I think is fundamental. And I've heard all the top investors, all the top traders say it is you need to learn how to flip fear and greed. And that, like, if you own a stock, right? If you and I, became best friends and we made a big investment into a stock, that with the natural human tendency, like, and we bought that stock and it went down, our natural human tendency would be to get greedy and say, I want to buy more. We should buy more. We should buy more, right? And then it goes down more. I want to buy more. Where instead of being greedy when it goes down, we should be fearful. And when we get a 10% loss, cut your losses. Okay. Cut your losses and run. Okay. And then if it goes down another 10% from there, well, then maybe buy back in. You're getting an even better deal. And on the positive side, right, and this I think is key to what we talked about earlier, my example with Antero Resources and some other gold and silver mining stocks. If you and I bought a stock today at $2 a share and it went to $3 3 months from now, the natural human, and everybody is the same way, the natural human instinct is then to be afraid that you're going to sell it, because you're going to be afraid that you're going to lose your gains, right? Where what the top traders say is that if you get something that goes up like that, instead of being afraid of losing your gains, you need to be greedy. And the really smart guys will say you need to buy more, right? Which I've not gotten to that
Right.
point yet. But for me, a good first step is, instead of selling it all out of fear because it went up, I'll maybe only sell half. And there's some nuances, because the metals sector, I think, is a little different than a lot of the general stock market in terms of how the stocks react, right? They go through these bear and bull cycles. But yeah, that would be, being able to flip that fear and greed and not pile in to one position, even though it keeps getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
Thanks, Ron. Well, one of the goals of the channel here is to, further my audiences and my own perspective and learnings, and I think we definitely did that today. Where can people find you if they want to follow along more on your different social channels?
You
And I
know,
can put this in the link as
Yeah,
well.
the big one is YouTube. They can just go to Ron's Basement. If they go to YouTube and type in Ron's Basement, I think I'm the only Ron's Basement out there, so it pops up in my pictures and all of the thumbnails, and pretty easy to recognize. I put out content on a real regular basis. I kind of follow the big news stories. My channel is definitely educational focused, but also kind of entertainment, right? I mean, I think that it's important, and I try to keep things very simple. There's a lot of people, and that's great, that love to dive into all these super technical things, COT reports and charts, and I do dive into that stuff, but I try to keep it real simple and kind of aggregate all the different information out there in the metals sector to come up with kind of interesting ideas and points about where the markets are, and more importantly, where I think they're going. And I got some really smart people, they give me a lot of great feedback and ideas for things to talk about on the show. But yeah, the people, we call ourselves basement dwellers, right? But they love gold and silver. And while I may joke around, there's a very serious foundation beneath it all. I mean, it's about wealth preservation at the end of the day, wealth growth and wealth preservation. And I always do my best to show up and try to come up with something that's interesting for everybody. And thank you, Dan, for having me on your show. I know the work that goes into this. So your viewers know, you sent me probably one of the most comprehensive, well-prepared outlines of what we were going to cover today. And I think you're going to be a great success. So thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Really appreciate you coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation and would love to have you back sometime. Thanks so much, and I'm sure that the viewers will be appreciative as well.
Yeah, that's right. And that's the most important thing that we remember, right? And I appreciate you saying that. It's me and you but there's another person out there who's joining us. And that's really the most important part. I always say, if it was just me, I'd be in my cold basement by myself. So thanks, Dan, and thanks to our viewers. And we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks.